Hello everybody and welcome back to another not applicable Formula 1 video. I hope that you're well. I hope you enjoyed the sprint qualifying because it is the day after sprint qualifying and the day after all of the absolute bedlam that went on the Formula 1 grid. Yesterday, everybody was just on Twitter continually hitting refresh to try and find out what was going to happen on the Formula 1 grid. Was Hamilton going to be disqualified? What was going to happen to Max Verstappen? Obviously, we now know that Max Verstappen picked up a €50,000 fine for touching the Mercedes car in the tiniest little possible way. And of course, Lewis Hamilton was disqualified from qualifying, dropping in from his amazing pole position lap all the way to the back of the grid. And if anything, it made sprint qualifying even better because we saw another astounding drive from Lewis Hamilton, getting all the way up to 5th place. Just sensational, and he will start the race from 10th today. But I'm not too worried about talking about sprint qualifying. We talked about that live. What I am interested in talking to you guys about today is already there are conspiracy theories galore about the incident between Hamilton and Verstappen and the DRS system. If you didn't see it, I don't know how you wouldn't have seen it. It was everywhere. But Lewis Hamilton's DRS system was just marginally outside the range that it was like it needs to be. So it needs to be 85 millimeters. Like that's the biggest that the slot can possibly be. And it was 85.2 millimeters on one side of the wing. So Lewis Hamilton ended up being disqualified from his qualifying lap. But as I said, there's lots of conspiracy theories going around, and there's 3 that I'd like to sort of delve into and look at today. And one is very, very, anti-Mercedes. One is very, very anti-Red Bull. And one I think is maybe more reasonable in the middle. Let's start with anti-Mercedes, because there's lots of people already jumping down the fact that, Max Verstappen was leading the championship already. Lewis Hamilton needed something to go in his favour. And people who are a little bit anti-Hamilton or anti-Mercedes are now starting to come into question and starting to see whether or not they can get away with, saying that Mercedes were trying to go against the integrity of the sport and actually try and actively cheat themselves to a pole position, sort of pointing the finger at Lewis Hamilton and saying, they knew that their DRS system was out of the regulations and they were trying to just sneak it past the FIA if they could. And there's, a fairly decent reason to believe that they might have, needed this little bit of an edge. I think it's fairly clear to see that the Red Bull car has been massively quicker, has been by far the fastest car this year overall. Max Verstappen has won a lot more races than Lewis Hamilton at this point, and Mercedes were facing a lot of pressure, not only in the Drivers' Championship, but also in the Constructors' Championship, where Red Bull have been slowly gaining on them over the last few races. So the reason they may have tried to, circumnavigate a rule kind of makes sense. Mercedes need to continue this regime that they've got of just winning the Constructors' Championship every single year. And of course, they want Lewis Hamilton to win the Drivers' Championship as well. So there's reason for them to try and break this rule. But as it turns out, the reason is very, very unlikely. Like, they are super, super unlikely to have, one, tried to circumnavigate a rule, and secondarily thought that they were going to get away with it. Also, it's very unlikely because Bottas, he had his wing tested. You'd assume that the wings would be the same on both Mercedes. They're trying to win the Constructors' Championship. It doesn't really matter to them overall which of the two drivers picks up the points. They're trying to win for both of those drivers. So they'd have done the same on Bottas's wing as well if it was outside the regulations, but Bottas's wing passed all of those regulations. And secondarily, Hamilton's wing actually only failed on one end. So the left-hand side of the wing was absolutely fine and within the 85 millimeters. So was the central part of the wing. It was only the right-hand structure of the wing that was outside of the regulations, which actually means that Hamilton was at a disadvantage going into qualifying, which just astounds me again. Like, if that's the case and he was at a disadvantage going into qualifying and was still that much quicker than everybody else, how are we not talking about this as one of the drives of the season, possibly the drives in Formula 1 history? Like, we've got to keep an eye on him today because we could see something very, very special. Of course, there are people out there that think Hamilton and Mercedes tried to slip one past the FIA for one of those reasons, but personally, I'm not so sure. Secondarily, we could look at it from a fairly neutral Formula 1 perspective and think that, neither Mercedes nor Red Bull are to blame. They probably think that there's just some sort of mistake in the middle. And well, maybe mistake is the wrong word. I want to talk about two things here. The Mercedes wing might have been damaged in transition from Mexico to Brazil and just not checked. Like, we've got to think, they've got to travel all this way from Mexico. They've got to take all of these parts. And as much as it might seem like an oversight from the team, you've got to remember the time constraints and the pressure that these guys are under. They've got very, very few days to get everything. I'm going to argue that they've got to take billions of parts away, pack them all away, get them transported from Mexico to Brazil in a very, very short period of time. They've got, 3 days realistically? They finish racing on Sunday. They've got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and by Thursday, they're already starting to, get ready and prepared for the practice sessions on Friday. They're doing all of the media stuff on the Thursday as well. So they've got to be ready within 3 days and get everything moved. That is a massive undertaking, and sometimes things might go under the radar, They thought, okay, we've packed away this wing, nothing would have happened to it in transition, I'm sure that we don't really need to check it again. Now, that does feel like a massive oversight, but as I said, it is one part of this huge change that they have to make every single weekend, especially in a triple header like this. And I'm not saying that what happened, is their fault almost. It's one of those things that could happen, especially as the calendar is getting more and more congested. Next year we've got another race on the calendar, 23. They're possibly looking at up to 25 the year after that. It is getting very, very congested in the Formula One calendar. Every single one of these races is getting closer and closer together, and it's becoming more and more difficult for the teams to keep up this level of consistency every single week. Like, the amount of things, the amount of moving parts on a Formula One car that these teams have to get right every single session of every single weekend, it feels like, thousands of miles apart from one another, is just astounding to me. And, Toto Wolff is under so much pressure to keep all of that moving, let alone being part of this session and then, one tiny little mistake, one tiny little oversight could cost them massively. The wing might not have been damaged in transition, to be fair. It may have been damaged in the qualifying session itself. This is what Toto Wolff has been saying is most likely happened, is that there was a little bit of damage that went onto the wing at some point over the course of the weekend. And, these cars, as they're going around the circuit, have incredibly strong forces pushing on them. Yes, the cars are incredibly strong themselves. They're carbon fiber. They're built to maintain this huge amount of pressure that is coming over the top of them with the air pressing down on that rear wing, especially as they're going down those faster straights without DRS. The pressures on these wings are absolutely monumental. And as I said before, it was only one side of the wing and it was out by 0.2 millimeters. That is just absolutely nothing. Like, saying that is marginal is an overstatement. It is absolutely tiny. I know that the wings are incredibly strong, but that just seems like such a tiny margin that it could, come into the fact that if there's a tiny little bit of damage or maybe a bit of wind, or I don't know. I don't know enough about the wings and their structure to say that, but it seems like such a tiny margin that it's feasible it could have happened during the session and there could have been some form of damage to the car. Maybe even if it was a tiny, tiny little bit of damage before that was then accentuated because of those forces put on the car as it was going around the circuit. This tiny little fault, this tiny little deviation possibly pushed that little extra bit by the fact that these cars are rattling around these circuits. And I'm not defending Mercedes. Rules are rules. They should have been disqualified. It was warranted. Their car didn't meet the regulations. And as much as Toto Wolff and Lewis Hamilton will argue against it, I think, they should have been disqualified. And as they've said themselves, they're looking forward now to just racing and trying to win this on the track instead of off the track. So from a sort of neutral perspective, I think, mistakes could have been made. There could have been maybe a little bit of damage to the wing, either before or during the session. And Mercedes probably aren't to blame, but it's a little bit of an oversight from them if they, didn't double check things just before, and maybe a little bit unfortunate for the Mercedes team. Then, of course, there is the Red Bull evil side of things where, finally the perspective that Mercedes are perfect. They couldn't have made any sort of error. You've seen them win championship after championship. They don't make errors. It is because there are some lying, cheating Austrians on the grid. There's Max Verstappen touched that wing, and he put his hand on that wing for much longer than he was allowed to. £50,000 fine. needed because he shouldn't have touched that wing. Absolutely not. It's not like Sebastian Vettel has touched every single car on the grid and used to bounce on top of the Mercedes car after every session. But Max Verstappen is not allowed to do it. And the wing was fine before. We have no proof that the wing wasn't fine before the session, so it was probably not fine. Or it was fine before, and Max Verstappen made it not fine afterwards. And he's a professional athlete, and he's incredibly strong. And he's an incredibly strong person, and therefore, with just one hand, could have flexed it by 0.2 millimeters. He's a very strong guy. I've heard he lifts quite heavily. And then he went to the stewards afterwards and, he told them what happened. He damaged the wing himself, and he said that Mercedes did it, and it's just very unfortunate for the Mercedes team. And he's a cheating, lying Netherlands man. Sorry, I can't even deliver that with a straight face. I feel like there's quite a few people with that mindset, and that's the mindset I've been sort of thrown at me in the comments recently, and I just don't know what to say to that. Like, I appreciate sticking around and watching the video. Thank you for the view, and I respect your passion for the sport, but I feel like we're just not on the same wavelength. You know what I mean? It's not you. It's not you. Red Bull, they're trying to catch up in the constructors. And Max Verstappen might go ahead and win this championship. And I can see where you're coming from. It's not you. It's me. We're just maybe not compatible with one another overall. And they're the three different ways that I see this Hamilton disqualification going. So where do you sit on the spectrum of conspiracy? Do you think Mercedes were trying to cheat? Do you think Max Verstappen did it on purpose to win his first World Drivers' Championship? Or are you somewhere in the middle where you think, it was probably a little bit of an oversight from Mercedes at some point, or a little bit of damage that got accentuated in one of the sessions? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. Let me know what you think. Do you think Max Verstappen can hold on for his first World Drivers' Championship as well? Thank you all so much for the support on the video yesterday. That was absolutely phenomenal. And on the channel recently in general. Click like, subscribe, and I will see you live in like a couple of hours for the Brazilian Grand Prix.